Please help us." The words cut through the gray dawn like a knife through fog. Marcus Reed stopped mid-stride in the hospital parking lot, his hand frozen on his car door handle. He turned slowly, exhaustion weighing down every movement. 16 hours. He had just worked 16 consecutive hours as a night shift security guard at Mercy Children's Hospital, covering for a colleague who'd called in sick. His eyes burned, his back ached. His 9-year-old daughter, Emma, was waiting at home with Mrs. Chen, the neighbor who watched her when his shifts ran long. All Marcus wanted was his bed, but the voice that had called out made him pause. 2 identical girls stood 10 feet away, 8 years old, maybe 9. They were small, thin, with matching dark braids and eyes red-rimmed from crying. Their clothes were rumpled, like they'd slept in them or hadn't slept at all. One girl clutched the other's hand so tightly their knuckles had gone white. "Please," the same girl said again, taking a hesitant step forward. "We need help. It's our mom. She won't wake up." Marcus's mind, dulled by fatigue, struggled to process what he was seeing. 2 children alone in a hospital parking lot at 6 in the morning. "Where are your parents?" he asked, though the answer was already forming in the hollow pit of his stomach. "That's what we're trying to tell you," the second girl said, her voice breaking. "Our mom collapsed. She's on the bathroom floor and we can't wake her up and we don't know what to do." The words tumbled out in a rush, desperate and terrified. Marcus took a step closer, his security training kicking in despite his exhaustion. "Did you call 911? Both girls shook their heads violently. "We can't," the first one whispered. "Mama said if anyone official comes, they'll take us away. She said we can't ever call 911 because Daddy's deployed and there's no family here, and they'll put us in foster care with strangers." Marcus felt his chest tighten. He knew that fear. He had lived it himself 3 years ago when his wife Elena died, and he'd been terrified that social services would deem him unfit, a single father working night shifts with no support system. That terror had never fully left him. "Where do you live?" he asked, already knowing he was about to make a decision that would change everything. 3 blocks from here," the second girl said, pointing east. "The Anderson Apartments. We walked here because we've seen you before. You work here. You help people. Please, please help our mama." Something in Marcus broke. Maybe it was the exhaustion lowering his defenses. Maybe it was the way these girls looked at him with the same desperate hope he'd seen in his own daughter's eyes when Elena was dying. Maybe it was the simple, undeniable fact that 2 children needed help and he was the only adult present. "Show me," he said. They ran. Marcus followed, his tired legs protesting every step. The girls moved with the frantic energy of pure fear, glancing back every few seconds to make sure he was still following. They led him through a maze of side streets, past closed shops and empty bus stops, until they reached a tired-looking brick building with a faded sign reading, "Anderson Apartments." The girls flew up 2 flights of stairs. Marcus's heart pounded as he climbed after them, a dreadful certainty growing with each step. They stopped at apartment 207. The door was unlocked. They'd left in such a hurry they hadn't even closed it properly. "In here," one of them said, pushing open the bathroom door. Marcus stepped inside and his blood turned to ice. A woman, mid-30s with blonde hair, lay crumpled on the white tile floor. She was unconscious, her skin pale as paper, her breathing shallow and rapid. Her lips had a faint blue tinge. Marcus had seen enough medical emergencies during his years at the hospital to know this was serious. "I'm calling 911, he said, already pulling out his phone. "No," both girls screamed in unison. "Please, no. They'll take us away." Marcus ignored them, his fingers already dialing. "This is a medical emergency. Your mother could die." He gave the address to the dispatcher, requested immediate paramedic response, then dropped to his knees beside the woman. He checked her pulse, faint and irregular. Her skin was cold and clammy. He tilted her head back to ensure her airway was clear, a basic first aid technique he'd learned from countless hospital safety trainings. "What's your mother's name?" he asked, keeping his voice calm despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "Sarah," one of the girls sobbed. "Sarah Mitchell. Our names are Lily and Rose. I'm Lily." She pointed to her sister. "That's Rose. Our daddy is Sergeant James Mitchell. He's in Afghanistan. He's not supposed to come home for 6 more weeks. Does your mom have any medical conditions?" Marcus asked, his hands checking Sarah's pockets for a medical alert bracelet or medication. "She gets dizzy sometimes," Rose said, her voice small and frightened. "She hasn't been eating much. She says she's just tired." The wail of sirens cut through the morning air. Within minutes, paramedics thundered up the stairs. Marcus stepped back, giving them room to work. They moved with practiced efficiency, checking vitals, inserting an IV line, loading Sarah onto a stretcher. One of the paramedics, a woman named Torres, who Marcus recognized from the hospital, gave him a sharp look. "You know her?" Torres asked. "No," Marcus said. "Her daughters found me in the parking lot at Mercy. I'm security there. They were looking for help." Torres nodded, understanding immediately. She turned to the girls. "We're taking your mama to Mercy Children's Hospital. It's the same hospital where this man works. She's going to be okay, but she needs doctors right now." "Can we come with her?" Lily asked, tears streaming down her face. "Of course, sweetheart," Torres said, but then her expression shifted, professional concern replacing compassion. "Where's your father?" "Afghanistan," Rose whispered. Torres and Marcus exchanged a look. The paramedics couldn't take custody of minors without a guardian. Torres pulled out her radio and made a call Marcus knew was inevitable. Social services. The ride to the hospital was a blur. Marcus followed the ambulance in his own car, the twins huddled in his back seat, silent except for their quiet crying. His mind raced. What was he doing? He didn't know these children. He had his own daughter to think about. Emma would be wondering where he was. Mrs. Chen would be worried. But he couldn't just abandon these girls, not when they looked at him like he was their only anchor in a suddenly terrifying world. At the hospital, Sarah was rushed into emergency care. The twins were left in a sterile waiting room, with Marcus standing guard like a sentinel. 20 minutes later, a weary-looking woman in a gray pantsuit approached. Her badge read, "Jennifer Hollis, Child Protective Services." "Mr. Reed?" she asked, and Marcus wondered how she already knew his name. Torres must have given her his information. "I understand you brought Lily and Rose Mitchell here after finding their mother unconscious." "Their mother collapsed," Marcus corrected. "They found me. They asked for help." Hollis nodded, her expression neutral but not unkind. "I've been in contact with the Red Cross. They're working on reaching Sergeant Mitchell, but given his location and the time difference, it could be 12 to 24 hours before we can speak with him directly. The girl's maternal grandmother passed away 2 years ago. No paternal grandparents living, no local relatives. I'm going to need to place the girls in emergency foster care. No." The word came from Lily, who had been listening to every word. Her voice was small but fierce. "We're not going with strangers. We're not." "Sweetheart," Hollis began, but Rose cut her off. "Please," Rose said, and she turned to Marcus with eyes that seemed far too old for an 8-year-old. "Please let us stay with you. Just one night, just until they reach our daddy. We promise we'll be good. We won't cause any trouble. Please don't make us go with strangers." Marcus felt the weight of their desperation like a physical force. He saw his own daughter in their faces, Emma, who had clung to him during Elena's funeral and begged him not to leave her alone. Emma, who still sometimes woke up crying from nightmares about losing her mother. How could he send these girls into the cold machinery of the foster system when they were already traumatized? "I'll take them," he heard himself say. "Just temporarily, until their father can be contacted." Hollis frowned. "Mr. Reed, I appreciate the impulse, but there are protocols. You're not a licensed foster parent. You haven't been vetted. I can't just hand over 2 minors to someone we don't know." "You know where I work," Marcus said, his voice steady. "I've been security at Mercy for 7 years. I've passed every background check the hospital requires. I have a daughter their age, I have space, and more importantly, these girls are terrified. They've just watched their mother collapse. Their father is on the other side of the world. Do you really want to add the trauma of being placed with complete strangers to what they're already dealing with?" Hollis was silent for a long moment, studying him. Then she looked at the twins, who were clutching each other and staring at Marcus like he was their last hope. "I'll need to do a home check," Hollis finally said. "I'll need references. And this is strictly temporary, Mr. Reed. 48 hours maximum while we work on reaching the father or finding appropriate family placement." "Understood," Marcus said, relief flooding through him even as a small voice in his head whispered that he was insane. 2 hours later, after Hollis had inspected his modest 3-bedroom house, interviewed Mrs. Chen, and reviewed his employment records, Marcus officially became the temporary guardian of Lily and Rose Mitchell. The girls sat on his worn couch, looking small and lost in his living room. Emma stood in the doorway of her room, curious but cautious. "Emma," Marcus said gently, "these are Lily and Rose. They're going to stay with us for a little while. Their mom is sick and their dad is away. I need you to help me make them feel welcome." Emma, bless her heart, nodded seriously. She walked over to the twins and held out her hand. "I'm Emma. I'm 9. Do you like drawing? I have a lot of colored pencils." It was a small gesture, but it broke something in the twins. Rose started crying, not sad tears, but tears of relief. Lily managed a tiny smile. "We like drawing," Lily said softly. As the girls settled in, as Emma showed them her room and offered to share her bed, Marcus stood in his kitchen and realized he was shaking. He had just taken in 2 strange children based on nothing but instinct and compassion. He didn't know them. He didn't know their mother. He was barely holding his own life together, working 60-hour weeks to make ends meet, raising his daughter in a house that still felt haunted by Elena's absence. But when he'd looked into those girls' eyes in the parking lot, when they'd begged him for help, he'd seen something he couldn't ignore. He'd seen the same desperation he'd felt 3 years ago when Elena was dying and the world was falling apart. He'd seen children who needed someone to choose them, to protect them, to be the adult who didn't walk away. Marcus made coffee with hands that still trembled slightly. Through the doorway, he could hear the soft sounds of the girls talking, Emma's voice gentle and welcoming. He closed his eyes and thought of Elena. She would have done the same thing. She would have brought them home without a second thought. He just hoped he wouldn't regret it. The exhaustion he'd felt in the parking lot was gone now, replaced by a wired, anxious energy. He checked his phone. No. Messages from the hospital about Sarah's condition. He'd call later. For now, he had 3 little girls to feed and a day to get through on no sleep. As he pulled out bread for sandwiches, he noticed the family photo on the refrigerator. Him, Elena, and baby Emma, taken 6 years ago. Elena's smile was bright, her eyes full of life. She'd been the kind of person who helped everyone, who never turned away from someone in need. Even in her final weeks, when the cancer had ravaged her body, she'd worried more about him and Emma than herself. "I hope I'm doing the right thing," he whispered to the photo. The only answer was the sound of children's laughter from the other room, tentative and fragile, but real. Marcus had expected the afternoon to be awkward, but Emma made it easier than he'd imagined. His daughter had always been perceptive, old beyond her 9 years in the way children who've lost a parent often are. She showed Lily and Rose her collection of books, her art supplies, the secret spot in her closet where she kept special treasures. The twins followed her like shadows, speaking only when spoken to, their voices soft and careful. "They're very polite," Mrs. Chen observed when she stopped by to drop off Emma's backpack. She stood in the doorway, watching the 3 girls sit at the kitchen table coloring together. Too polite, maybe. Those are children who've learned to be invisible. Marcus knew what she meant. The twins said please and thank you for everything. They ate the sandwiches he made without complaint, even though he could tell they were too anxious to be hungry. They asked permission before touching anything. When Emma offered to share her toys, they handled each item like it was made of glass, as if afraid it might break or they might be punished for playing. But there were other things, stranger things, that Marcus noticed as the afternoon wore into evening. The twins spoke to each other in whispers, rapid conversations in what sounded almost like another language, not Spanish or French or any language Marcus recognized, but something else. A private twin language, maybe. He'd heard that was a thing, twins developing their own way of communicating. Still, it made the hair on the back of his neck stand up when he'd walk into a room, and they'd immediately fall silent, their eyes tracking him with an intensity that felt almost adult. They also flinched at ordinary sounds. When Marcus closed a cabinet door with a normal amount of force, both girls jumped. When the refrigerator's ice maker dropped cubes with a clatter, Rose let out a small gasp, and Lily grabbed her sister's hand. The sound of a neighbor's dog barking made them both go rigid, their faces pale. "It's okay," Marcus said gently after the dog incident. "You're safe here. Nothing's going to hurt you." Lily nodded, but her expression remained guarded, watchful. Rose whispered something to her sister in that strange private language, and Lily whispered back. Marcus pretended not to notice, but unease coiled in his stomach. By 8 o'clock, all three girls were exhausted. Emma usually stayed up until 9, but she was yawning, worn out from the emotional intensity of the day. Marcus suggested they get ready for bed. Emma's room had a double bed and a sleeping bag. The plan was for Emma to take the bed and the twins to share the sleeping bag, but when Marcus came to check on them after they'd changed into borrowed pajamas, he found all three girls squeezed into the double bed together. "They need to sleep together," Emma explained, her voice matter-of-fact. "They're scared." "It's okay, Daddy. There's room." Marcus didn't have the heart to argue. He kissed Emma's forehead, then hesitated before gently touching each twin's shoulder. "Sleep well," he said softly. "Your mom is going to be okay. The doctors are taking good care of her." "Do you promise?" Rose asked, her voice small in the darkness. Marcus knew better than to make promises he couldn't keep, but looking at her frightened face, he couldn't help himself. "I promise," he said. "Get some rest." He left the door cracked open and retreated to the living room. His couch was old and lumpy, but he'd slept on worse. He set his phone alarm for 6 in the morning, planning to call the hospital first thing to check on Sarah's condition. Then he lay down, pulled a blanket over himself, and closed his eyes. Sleep came fast, the kind of deep, dreamless unconsciousness that follows extreme exhaustion. But something pulled him back to the surface at 2:17 in the morning. He opened his eyes, disoriented, his security guard instincts screaming that something was wrong. The living room was dark, except for the faint glow of a streetlight filtering through the curtains. Marcus lay perfectly still, letting his eyes adjust, his ears straining for whatever sound had woken him. At first, he heard nothing. Then he saw them. Lily and Rose stood in the center of his living room, maybe 6 feet from the couch. They were completely motionless, their white pajamas making them look like small ghosts in the darkness. They weren't looking at him. They were staring at the wall, at the collection of framed photographs Marcus kept there. Family photos, him and Emma, him and Elena, the three of them together. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. "Girls," he said softly, careful not to startle them. "Are you okay? Do you need something?" Neither twin moved. They continued staring at the photos with an intensity that made Marcus's skin crawl. He sat up slowly, swinging his legs off the couch. "Girls," he said again, louder this time. As if released from a spell, both twins turned to look at him in perfect unison. Their eyes were wide, reflecting the dim light. When they spoke, their voices overlapped, creating an eerie stereo effect that raised goosebumps on Marcus's arms. "She looks like the lady from our dreams." Marcus felt his breath catch. "What?" "The lady," Lily said, her voice still soft but more individual now. She pointed at a photo of Elena, one taken about a year before she got sick. Elena was laughing, her head thrown back, her hair catching the sunlight. It was Marcus's favorite picture of her. "In our dreams," Rose continued, as if finishing her sister's thought. "She tells us things. She tells us not to be afraid." The room suddenly felt very cold. Marcus stood up, moving slowly toward the twins. "You've been dreaming about her? About this woman?" Both girls nodded. "We've had the same dreams," Lily whispered, "for weeks now. She has kind eyes. She tells us that everything will be okay. She tells us to find her family." Marcus's mouth went dry. His rational mind scrambled for explanations. They were traumatized children. They'd seen the photos earlier in the day, maybe caught a glimpse while they were coloring at the kitchen table. Their stressed brains had incorporated the images into anxiety dreams. It was a coincidence. It had to be. "That's my wife," Marcus heard himself say. "Her name was Elena. She passed away 3 years ago." "We know," Rose said simply. "She told us." The bottom dropped out of Marcus's stomach. This wasn't possible. This was trauma, confusion, the overactive imagination of frightened children. He knelt down to their level, trying to keep his voice calm and rational. "Girls, you've had a really scary day. Your minds are playing tricks on you. You probably saw these photos earlier and forgot about it, and now they're showing up in your dreams. It's normal. It doesn't mean anything." But even as he said the words, he didn't quite believe them. There was something in the way the twins looked at him, a knowing quality that seemed far too old for 8-year-old children. "She said you'd say that," Lily said, tilting her head slightly. "She said you don't believe in things you can't see or touch, but she loves you anyway. She loves Emma. She says Emma is so brave." Marcus felt tears spring to his eyes. He blinked them back furiously. "Come on," he said, his voice rough. "Let's get you back to bed. You need sleep. Everything will make more sense in the morning." He guided the twins back to Emma's room. His daughter was still sound asleep, curled on her side, her arms stretched across the pillow. The twins climbed back into bed without protest, settling on either side of Emma like bookends. Marcus pulled the blanket up over all 3 girls, his hands shaking slightly. "Try to sleep," he whispered. "No more wandering around at night, okay?" "Okay," both girls said in unison. Marcus returned to the couch, but sleep was impossible now. He lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. Grief could do strange things. He knew that. After Elena died, he'd sworn he could smell her perfume in the house for months. He'd hear her voice in the sound of the wind. He'd see her face in crowds. The mind created what it needed to cope with loss. But this was different. These children had never met Elena. They couldn't possibly know anything about her, unless Sarah had somehow told them. But why would she? How would she even know about Elena? Marcus had never met Sarah Mitchell before this morning. The coincidences piled up like a weight on his chest, suffocating and inexplicable. He must have dozed eventually, because the next thing he knew, light was streaming through the windows and the smell of coffee filled the air. Marcus sat up, disoriented. Coffee? He hadn't set the coffee maker. He glanced at his phone. 6:03 in the morning. He heard voices in the kitchen, children's laughter mixed with the sound of plates clinking. Marcus stood up, his body stiff from the uncomfortable couch, and walked toward the sounds. What he saw when he entered the kitchen made him stop dead in his tracks. Emma stood at the counter, carefully spreading jam on toast. That was normal. What wasn't normal was the elaborate breakfast spread covering his small kitchen table. Scrambled eggs, perfectly golden. Bacon, crispy but not burned. Fresh fruit cut into neat pieces, toast arranged on a plate, and 2 twin girls moving around his kitchen with the confidence of people who knew exactly where everything was. As Marcus watched, frozen in the doorway, Rose opened the cabinet above the sink without hesitation and pulled out plates. Not just any plates. She pulled out the good plates, the ones Elena had picked out, the ones Marcus never used because they reminded him too much of the life he'd lost. She set them on the table with practiced ease. Lily, meanwhile, was at the coffee maker. She poured a cup, then turned and opened a different cabinet, the one where Marcus kept dry goods. Pasta, rice, canned beans. She reached behind a box of spaghetti and pulled out a blue ceramic mug. It was Elena's favorite mug, the one she'd bought on their honeymoon in California, the one with a tiny chip on the handle that she'd refused to throw away. Marcus hadn't used it since she died. He'd shoved it to the back of the cabinet where he wouldn't have to see it every day. "Here's your coffee, Mr. Reed," Lily said brightly, holding out the blue mug. "You always use this one, right?" Marcus couldn't speak. His throat had closed up. How could she possibly know that? The mug was hidden, deliberately placed where it wouldn't be seen. There was no way these children could have found it by accident. Rose appeared at his elbow, holding out a fork. "The hair ties Emma likes are in the junk drawer," she said conversationally. "The purple sparkly ones. Should I get them for her?" The junk drawer. Marcus's junk drawer was a disaster, a chaotic mess of batteries, rubber bands, twist ties, spare keys, and yes, buried somewhere in that chaos, a package of purple sparkly hair ties that Emma loved. But how would Rose know that? Why would she even be looking? "How do you know where things are?" Marcus asked, his voice coming out strangled and strange. "You've never been here before." The twins exchanged a glance, that silent communication that made Marcus's skin crawl. Emma, oblivious to the tension, brought the toast to the table. "Aren't they good helpers, Daddy?" Emma said cheerfully. "They said they wanted to make you breakfast because you helped them. Isn't that nice?" "Very nice," Marcus managed, but his eyes never left the twins. They smiled at him, innocent and sweet, but there was something behind those smiles. Knowledge, recognition, as if they'd made breakfast in this kitchen 100 times before. As if they belonged here. Lily poured coffee into the blue mug and set it on the table. She arranges the cup just so, the handle pointing to the right, exactly the way Elena used to do it. "We wanted to say thank you," Lily said softly, "for helping us, for not being scared of us." "Why would I be scared of you?" Marcus asked, even though his heart was pounding and fear was crawling up his spine like ice water. Rose tilted her head, studying him with those two old eyes. "Because we know things we shouldn't know," she said simply. "Because we dream about your wife. Because we can feel that she loved you here, in this house. It's in the walls. It's in the air. We can feel it." Marcus sank into a chair, his legs suddenly unable to hold him. This wasn't normal. This wasn't trauma or imagination or coincidence. Something was happening here, something he couldn't explain with logic or reason. These children knew things about his home, his life, his wife, that they had no possible way of knowing. Emma sat down and started eating, chattering happily about a dream she'd had about unicorns. The twins served themselves breakfast with eerie efficiency, passing dishes back and forth, moving in synchronized patterns. They ate quietly, politely, but Marcus could barely taste his food. His mind was spinning, trying to find rational explanations and finding none. "Who are you?" he wanted to ask. "How do you know these things?" But he couldn't form the words, not in front of Emma, not when the morning sunlight was streaming through the windows and everything looked so normal and peaceful. The blue mug sat in front of him, steam rising from the dark coffee, and all Marcus could think about was Elena's hands wrapped around this same cup 3 years ago, sitting at this same table, smiling at him over the rim. The memory was so vivid it hurt. "She misses you," Rose said suddenly, so quietly that Marcus almost didn't hear her. "Your wife. She misses you and Emma so much. But she's glad you're not alone anymore. She's glad you found us." Marcus's hands began to shake. He set down his fork before he dropped it. The kitchen, his familiar safe kitchen, suddenly felt like foreign territory, and the two little girls, sitting at his table, eating scrambled eggs and smiling like they hadn't just turned his world upside down, were no longer just frightened children who needed help. They were something else entirely, something he couldn't begin to understand. And he had just invited them into his home. Marcus's phone rang at 9:37, shattering the tense silence that had settled over breakfast. He grabbed it like a lifeline, desperate for anything to break the spell of unease that had wrapped around him. The caller ID showed Mercy Children's Hospital. "Mr. Reed?" a nurse's voice said when he answered. "This is Stephanie from the 4th floor. Sarah Mitchell is awake and stable. She's asking to speak with you. She says it's urgent." Marcus closed his eyes, relief flooding through him. I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. He called Mrs. Chen, who arrived within 10 minutes, her arms full of fresh-baked cookies and a warm smile. "The girls will be fine with me," she assured Marcus, shooing him toward the door. "Go, talk to their mother, bring back good news." The drive to the hospital felt surreal. Marcus's hands gripped the steering wheel too tightly, his mind still replaying the morning's impossibilities. The blue mug, the hair ties, the way the twins moved through his kitchen like they'd lived there for years, and their words, soft and certain. "She misses you. She's glad you found us." He parked in the staff lot, flashed his security badge at the front desk, and took the elevator to the 4th floor. The oncology ward. Of course it was the oncology ward, the same floor where Elena had spent her final weeks. Marcus hadn't been up here since her death. He had requested never to be assigned security shifts on this floor. Walking these halls now felt like stepping back in time into the worst period of his life. Sarah Mitchell was in room 412, a private room with pale green walls and a window overlooking the parking lot. She was sitting up in bed, an IV line running into her arm, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked fragile but alert, and when Marcus entered, her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice hoarse. "Thank you for everything you did, for my girls. They told me you stayed with them, that you brought them home." "They needed help," Marcus said, pulling a chair close to her bedside. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Sarah said. "They've got me on insulin now. Turns out I've had undiagnosed type 1 diabetes for probably 6 months. My blood sugar crashed. The doctor said if the girls hadn't found help when they did, I might not have made it." Marcus nodded, unsure what to say. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Sarah twisted the blanket between her fingers, her expression tortured. "I need to tell you something," she finally said. "Can you close the door?" Marcus stood and pushed the door shut. When he returned to his chair, Sarah was staring at her hands, tears streaming down her face. "What I'm about to say is going to sound insane," she whispered. "You're going to think I'm crazy or dangerous or both, but I need you to hear me out. Please." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. "Okay," he said slowly. "I'm listening." Sarah took a shaky breath. 3 years ago, I was a night shift oncology nurse on this floor. I don't work here anymore. I left about a year after it happened because I couldn't handle it emotionally. But 3 years ago, I was assigned to a patient named Elena Reed. The world tilted. Marcus gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles going white. "What did you just say?" "Your wife," Sarah said, looking up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "Elena, she was my patient during her final month. I was with her almost every night. I held her hand. I talked to her. I listened to her talk about you and about Emma. She loved you both so much. She was terrified of leaving you." Marcus couldn't breathe. His lungs had forgotten how to work. He remembered Elena's final weeks, the blur of hospital rooms and morphine doses, and doctors speaking in gentle, pitying tones. He remembered the nurses, kind and professional, but he couldn't remember their faces. He'd been too exhausted, too destroyed by watching his wife die to register individual people. "You were there," he managed to say. "The last night?" Sarah nodded, tears flowing freely now. "You'd been at her bedside for 72 hours straight. You hadn't slept. You hadn't eaten. Elena begged you to go home, to check on Emma, to get some rest. She promised she'd be okay until morning. She promised you'd have time to say goodbye." Marcus remembered. God, he remembered. He'd been so tired he could barely stand. Elena had squeezed his hand and told him to go, that Emma needed him, that she'd still be there when he came back in the morning. He'd kissed her forehead and left, planning to sleep for a few hours and return at dawn. "She knew," Sarah said softly. "She knew she wasn't going to make it until morning. She waited until you left, and then she called me in. She was so calm, Marcus, so clear. She said she needed to ask me for something important." Marcus felt tears burning his eyes. "What did she ask you?" "She made me promise to watch over you and Emma," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "She said she knew I was a mother too. She'd seen photos of my girls on my phone. She said one mother to another, she needed someone to make sure her family would be okay. She made me swear I'd check on you from time to time, just to be sure you weren't drowning. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of grief-induced hallucination." Marcus shook his head, unable to process what he was hearing. "I kept that promise," Sarah continued. "Maybe I kept it too well. I looked you up. I found out where you lived. I'd drive by sometimes, not to stalk you or anything creepy like that, but just to see, to make sure you were still standing. I saw you at the grocery store once with Emma. She was wearing a purple backpack shaped like a butterfly. You looked so tired, so sad, but you were functioning. You were being a father. I told myself that was enough, that Elena would be satisfied. Marcus's mind was reeling. He tried to remember a blonde nurse, tried to place Sarah's face in his fractured memories of Elena's final days, but everything was too blurry, too painful. "When my husband deployed 6 months ago," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I fell apart. The twins and I were struggling. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't taking care of myself. I didn't know I was sick. I was just so tired all the time. And I started talking about you and Emma. I don't know why. Maybe because I was thinking about Elena's promise. Maybe because I saw you in the cafeteria at the hospital one day and it all came flooding back. But I told my girls about the sad man who lost his wife, about the little girl who lost her mother. I told them I'd made a promise to watch over you." "The twins," Marcus said, understanding beginning to dawn. "They heard you." "They became obsessed," Sarah said, nodding. "They kept asking about you, about Emma. They begged me to help you. They said you needed someone. They said the lady, your wife, came to them in dreams and told them you were lonely. I thought they were just being imaginative. Kids say strange things, but they wouldn't let it go." Marcus remembered Rose's words from that morning. "She's glad you're not alone anymore. She's glad you found us." The stress of them constantly asking, constantly worried combined with my diabetes, Sarah continued. I collapsed. And my girls, God, my brilliant, terrifying girls, they remembered where you worked. They'd heard me mention Mercy Children's Hospital. They knew you were security there. So they found you. It wasn't random, Marcus said, his voice hollow. None of this was random. No, Sarah said, and there's something else. Something I need to show you. She reached for the small bag on her bedside table, her hands shaking. She pulled out a worn envelope and handed it to Marcus. Inside was a photograph. Marcus pulled it out and his heart stopped. It was a family photo. Him, Elena, and baby Emma. Emma was maybe 6 months old, chubby and smiling. Elena had her head on Marcus's shoulder, her expression radiant. Marcus remembered when this photo was taken. It had been at a park, a beautiful spring day before the cancer diagnosis, when life was still normal and good. He'd thought all copies of this photo were at home in albums or frames. Elena gave this to me, Sarah whispered, that last night. She pulled it out of a drawer beside her bed. She said she'd been carrying it with her. She wrote something on the back. Marcus turned the photo over with trembling hands. On the back, in Elena's handwriting, slightly shaky but unmistakable, were words that made his vision blur with tears. If you ever meet them again, tell them I kept my promise. Love finds its way home. Marcus stared at the words until they swam and merged. This was Elena's handwriting, her looping ease, her way of dotting her I's with little circles. This was real. This was her message, written hours before she died, given to a nurse she barely knew, a message meant for a future she somehow knew would come. I don't understand, Marcus said, his voice breaking. How could she know? How could she possibly know that 3 years later your daughters would find me? That any of this would happen? I don't know, Sarah said, crying openly now. I've asked myself that question 1,000 times. Maybe she didn't know. Maybe it was just a mother's desperate hope, a prayer thrown into the universe. Or maybe, she whispered, some connections are stronger than death. Maybe love really does find its way home. Marcus couldn't speak. He sat holding the photograph, his wife's words burning into his mind. Love finds its way home. Elena had known he'd be lonely. She'd known he'd need help. And somehow, impossibly, she'd created a bridge between her death and his future. A promise kept by a stranger who became less strange with every passing moment. The twins, Marcus finally managed. They dream about her. They said she tells them things. Sarah nodded. I know. They've been dreaming about Elena for weeks. They describe her perfectly, Marcus. Her smile, her laugh, her voice. They've never seen a photo of her. I never showed them one. But they know her. They say she's kind, that she worries about you and Emma, that she wants you to be happy. This is impossible, Marcus said, but even as he spoke, he knew it wasn't. He'd felt it in his kitchen that morning, the sense of Elena's presence, the way the twins moved through his space like they belonged there. They were carrying something of Elena with them, some imprint of her love, her determination to care for her family even after death. I'm sorry, Sarah said. I'm sorry if this is too much. I'm sorry if bringing my girls into your life has caused you pain. I never meant for any of this to happen. I just wanted to keep my promise to your wife. Marcus looked up at her. This woman who had held his wife's hand in her final hours, who had carried a promise for 3 years, who had somehow become part of a plan he still didn't fully understand. You kept your promise, Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. Elena asked you to watch over us, and you did. You sent your daughters to find us when we needed each other most. Because that's what this is, isn't it? It's not just about you helping me. It's about all of us helping each other. Sarah smiled through her tears. My girls love you already. They came home talking about Emma, about your house, about how safe they felt. They said it felt like somewhere they'd been before, even though they hadn't. Marcus thought of the blue mug, of the twins' strange knowledge, of Rose's words. We can feel that she loved you here, in this house. It's in the walls. I believe in a lot of things, Marcus said slowly, staring at Elena's handwriting on the back of the photograph. But I've never believed in ghosts or spirits or messages from beyond. I've spent 3 years thinking death was the end, that Elena was gone completely. But this, he held up the photo, his hand, shaking. This changes everything. What do we do now? Sarah asked. Marcus didn't have an answer. He sat in the quiet hospital room, holding a message from his dead wife, thinking about two little girls who dreamed of a woman they'd never met, who knew things they shouldn't know, who'd been sent into his life by a promise made in the final hours before death. We figure it out together, he finally said, because apparently that's what Elena wanted. That's what she arranged. Somehow, impossibly, she brought us together, and I'm not going to waste that gift trying to explain it. Sarah reached out and squeezed his hand. Thank you, she whispered, for believing me, for not thinking I'm insane. Marcus squeezed back, then stood. He needed to get back to the girls. He needed to look at his daughters, all three of them now it seemed, and try to understand what Elena had known, what she'd seen in that final night that allowed her to orchestrate this impossible connection. As he walked to the door, Sarah called out one more time. Marcus. He turned. She really did love you, Sarah said softly, more than anything in this world. That's what she wanted me to tell you, that her love didn't end. It just changed form. Marcus nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He walked out of the room, down the familiar hallway of the oncology ward, and into the elevator. He looked at the photograph in his hands, at Elena's smile, at the message on the back. Love finds its way home. She'd kept her promise. Somehow, against all logic and reason, Elena had kept her promise. And now, Marcus had to figure out what came next. Marcus drove home with Elena's photograph on the passenger seat beside him, his mind still trying to process the impossible truth Sarah had revealed. Love finds its way home. The words repeated in his head like a mantra, like a prayer, like the answer to a question he'd been asking for 3 years. He turned onto his street, already planning what he'd say to the girls, how he'd try to explain the unexplainable. But the moment he saw his house, his blood turned to ice. 2 official vehicles were parked in his driveway, a sedan with government plates and a marked Child Protective Services van. Marcus's heart began to pound as he pulled to the curb. Through his front window, he could see movement, shapes of people in his living room. Something was very wrong. He ran to the front door, which stood open. Inside, his home had been transformed into a crime scene. Mrs. Chen stood in the corner, wringing her hands, her face pale with distress. Emma sat on the couch, her eyes red from crying, and Lily and Rose huddled together in the armchair, both girls sobbing, their faces buried in each other's shoulders. Standing in the center of Marcus's living room like a conquering general was a man in a cheap gray suit. He was tall, thin, with wire-rimmed glasses and a mouth set in a permanent sneer of disapproval. His badge hung around his neck on a lanyard. Donald Pritchard, Senior Investigator, Child Protective Services. Mr. Reed, Pritchard said, his voice dripping with cold authority, how convenient that you've returned. We've been waiting for you. What's going on? Marcus demanded, moving toward Emma, but Pritchard stepped into his path. Don't, Pritchard snapped. Don't move any closer to those children. In fact, you need to stay right where you are while I explain the severity of your situation. Marcus felt the world tilting. The photograph was still clutched in his hand, Elena's promise burning against his palm. Daddy, Emma cried out, trying to get up from the couch, but a female CPS worker Marcus hadn't noticed gently, but firmly held her back. This morning, Pritchard continued, his voice rising with righteous anger, our office received an anonymous tip about a deeply disturbing incident. It was reported that you, a hospital security guard, approached 2 unaccompanied minor children in a parking lot early yesterday morning, that you followed these children to their residence, that you entered said residence without permission, and that you then removed these children from their home and brought them here, to your house, without any legal authority to do so. That's not what happened, Marcus said, his voice shaking. Their mother collapsed. They came to me for help. I called 911. I saved their mother's life. So you claim, Pritchard said, his tone making it clear he didn't believe a word. Yet you failed to mention that you then took custody of these children without proper authorization. You failed to mention that you spent the night alone with 2 vulnerable little girls who have no connection to you whatsoever. Jennifer Hollis authorized it, Marcus said desperately. She's the caseworker. She did a home inspection. She approved temporary placement. This was all legal. Ms. Hollis has been contacted, Pritchard said coldly. She admits that she perhaps acted hastily, that she allowed her emotions to override proper protocol. She's been placed on administrative leave pending review, which means her authorization is now null and void. The room spun. This couldn't be happening. Marcus looked at Mrs. Chen, who shook her head helplessly. He looked at the twins, who were clutching each other and staring at him with terrified eyes. "But wait," Pritchard said, pulling a manila folder from his briefcase with theatrical flourish. "It gets worse, much worse. The anonymous tip didn't just include allegations, it included evidence." He pulled out a series of photographs and spread them on Marcus's coffee table, like a prosecutor presenting a murder weapon. Marcus stepped closer, his stomach churning, and looked down at the images. The first photo showed Marcus in the hospital parking lot, the twins approaching him. The angle made it look like he was waiting for them, like he'd been expecting them. The second showed him following the girls down the street, his body language captured in a way that looked predatory rather than helpful. The third showed him entering Sarah's apartment building, and the fourth, the most damning, showed him leaving the building with both girls, his hand on Rose's shoulder in what could be interpreted as a possessive grip rather than a comforting gesture. "These photos are real, aren't they, Mr. Reed?" Pritchard asked, his voice heavy with accusation. "You can't deny you did these things." "Out of context," Marcus said, his voice rising. "Yes, those things happened, but not the way you're making it look. Someone was watching. Someone photographed me helping these children and made it look like something sinister." "Or," Pritchard said, leaning forward, "you're a predator who exploited his position as hospital security to gain access to vulnerable children. You stalked them. You inserted yourself into a crisis situation. You manipulated a naive caseworker into giving you custody. And now you're trying to cover your tracks with an elaborate story about dying wives and promises and dreams." "He's not like that," Mrs. Chen suddenly spoke up, her voice trembling but fierce. "I've known Marcus for 5 years. He's a good man, a good father. He would never hurt a child." Pritchard barely glanced at her. "Your testimony is irrelevant, ma'am. You're his friend. Of course you'd defend him." "I'm not his friend," Mrs. Chen said, drawing herself up to her full 5 feet of height. "I'm his neighbor. I watch his daughter because he's a single father who works hard and treats his child with love and respect. And yesterday, he helped 2 little girls whose mother was dying. That's not predatory. That's decent." Pritchard ignored her and turned to the twins. "Lily, Rose, you need to come with me now. You're going to be placed in a proper emergency foster home where you'll be safe." "No," both girls screamed in unison. The sound was piercing, desperate. "Please, no. We want to stay here. We want to stay with Mr. Reed." "I understand you're confused," Pritchard said in a tone that was clearly meant to sound kind, but came across as condescending. "Sometimes bad people seem nice. That's how they trick children. But I promise you, where you're going will be much better." "He's not a bad person," Lily sobbed. "He helped us. He saved our mama. We chose him. We found him." Pritchard's jaw tightened. The female CPS worker moved forward, reaching for the twins. Emma jumped up from the couch, her face red with fury. "Leave them alone," Emma shouted. "You can't take them. They're our family now." "Emma," Marcus said, his voice breaking, but Pritchard cut him off. "Control your daughter, Mr. Reed, or I'll have to include her behavior in my report as evidence of an unstable home environment." Marcus felt something snap inside him. Years of grief, of struggling alone, of fighting to be a good father while the world seemed determined to tear him down, all of it erupted in a wave of fury. "You have no right," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "You have no right to come into my home and accuse me of being a monster. I helped those girls. I saved their mother. And you're twisting it into something sick because someone, some anonymous coward, sent you photos without context." "I'm doing my job," Pritchard said coldly. "I'm protecting children." "You're destroying a family," Marcus shot back. "You're traumatizing children who've already been through hell. Look at them. Look at their faces. Do they look like they're afraid of me?" Pritchard did look, and for a moment something flickered in his expression. Uncertainty, maybe, or doubt. The twins were reaching toward Marcus, their faces desperate, their sobs heartbreaking, but then the professional mask slammed back into place. Children often bond with their abusers, Pritchard said. It's called Stockholm Syndrome. It means nothing. The female CPS worker, her own face showing signs of distress at the situation, gently took the twins' hands. "Come on, sweethearts," she said softly. "Let's go for a ride. We'll find you a nice place to stay." The twins fought. They screamed and kicked and begged. Lily reached for Marcus with such desperation that it took both CPS workers to carry them out. Emma collapsed on the couch, sobbing. Mrs. Chen put her arms around the little girl, tears streaming down her own face. Marcus stood frozen, his hands clenched into fists, every instinct screaming at him to fight, to physically stop them from taking the girls. But he knew that would only make everything worse. He was trapped, helpless, watching another piece of his heart being ripped away. At the door, Pritchard turned back. "You are not to contact these children, Mr. Reed. You are not to contact their mother. You are not to come near them. If you violate this order, I will have you arrested for harassment and custodial interference. Do you understand?" Marcus couldn't speak. He could only nod, his throat closed with rage and grief. Pritchard left, taking the twins with him. Their screams echoed down the street until the van doors slammed shut and the vehicles pulled away. The silence that followed was suffocating. Marcus collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands. Emma ran to him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Daddy," she sobbed. "Daddy, why did they take them? We were helping them." "I know, baby," Marcus whispered, holding his daughter tight. "I know we were." Mrs. Chen stood helplessly nearby, her face a mask of sorrow and anger. "This is wrong," she said quietly. "That man is wrong. Anyone with eyes can see you were helping those children." But that was the problem, wasn't it? Pritchard had eyes, but he saw only what he wanted to see, or what someone wanted him to see. Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out with shaking hands, expecting maybe a message from Jennifer Hollis, the caseworker who'd been suspended, or from the hospital. But the number was unknown, the area code unfamiliar. The message was short, brutal, and crystal clear. "You should have minded. Your own business. Some people don't deserve second chances." Marcus stared at the screen, his blood running cold. This wasn't random bureaucratic overreach. This was personal. This was targeted. Someone had been watching him. Someone had photographed him. Someone had filed that anonymous report and included those photos specifically to destroy him. But who? And why? He sent Emma to her room with Mrs. Chen, then sat down at his computer. His hands shook as he typed, but his mind was clearing. The security guard, training kicking in. Someone had done this to him, someone with a grudge, someone who knew him, knew where he worked, knew enough about CPS protocols to weaponize them. He started with Donald Pritchard. A simple internet search revealed a trail of complaints and accusations. Pritchard had been investigated twice for overzealous enforcement, for pursuing cases with insufficient evidence, for letting personal feelings override professional judgment. He'd been cleared both times, but the accusations were there, a pattern of behavior. Marcus dug deeper, accessing public records, old news articles. And then he found it. 3 years ago, a small article in the local paper. Hospital employee terminated for drug theft. Marcus clicked the link, his heart pounding, and read the story. Cheryl Pritchard, a pharmacy technician at Mercy Children's Hospital, had been fired after being caught stealing controlled medications. The theft had been discovered during a routine security check. The security guard who'd filed the initial report had chosen to remain anonymous in the article, but Marcus didn't need to see the name. He remembered. It had been him. He'd been making his rounds, had seen a pharmacy tech stuffing pill bottles into her purse. He'd reported it immediately. The woman had been fired, had lost her license, had faced criminal charges. Marcus had never known her name, had never followed up on what happened to her. It had been just another incident report in a long career of incident reports. But Cheryl Pritchard remembered, and apparently, so did her ex-husband. Marcus's phone buzzed again, another message from the unknown number. 3 years ago, you destroyed my family. Now I'm returning the favor. How does it feel? Marcus's hands clenched around his phone. Pritchard wasn't investigating a case. He was executing revenge. He'd used his position, his authority, his badge to hurt Marcus the same way Marcus had, however unintentionally, hurt him. And he'd used the twins, two innocent little girls, as his weapons. The photograph of Elena still lay on the coffee table where Marcus had dropped it when Pritchard had started his accusations. Marcus picked it up, staring at his wife's smile, at her handwritten words. Love finds its way home. Elena had kept her promise. She'd brought Sarah and the twins into his life. She'd created a connection that should have been beautiful, healing, redemptive. And now a vindictive bureaucrat was tearing it all apart because of a grudge 3 years old. Marcus stood up, his jaw set, his grief transforming into determination. Pritchard thought he'd won. He thought Marcus would curl up and accept defeat, would let the twins disappear into the foster system, would let this injustice stand. But Pritchard had made one critical mistake. He'd underestimated what a father would do to protect his family. And Marcus Reed, who'd lost his wife to cancer, who'd raised his daughter alone through grief and struggle, who'd been chosen by 2 little girls and their dying mother to be part of something bigger than himself, was not going to let anyone take that away. Not without a fight. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. Emma had finally cried herself into exhaustion around midnight, curled up in his arms on the couch, whispering the twins' names in her sleep. Mrs. Chen had stayed until 10, making tea neither of them drank, offering comfort that couldn't quite reach the hollow rage burning in Marcus's chest. When she finally left, Marcus laid Emma in her bed, kissed her forehead, and returned to his computer. By 3 a.m, he had everything he needed. By 4, he'd made a decision that couldn't be unmade. He called the hospital at 6, as soon as visiting hours began. The nurse who answered tried to tell him Sarah was resting, that she shouldn't be disturbed, but Marcus's voice carried an urgency that couldn't be ignored. It's about her daughters, he said. Please, it's an emergency. 5 minutes later, Sarah's weak voice came through the phone. Marcus, what's wrong? Where are my girls? Marcus told her everything. The anonymous report, the photographs, Pritchard's accusations, the twins being taken screaming from his home. He told her about the threatening texts, about Cheryl Pritchard, about the revenge that had been 3 years in the making. Sarah listened in silence, and when Marcus finished, that silence stretched for a long, terrible moment. Then Sarah said, in a voice Marcus had never heard from her before, a voice of absolute steel beneath the weakness, I'm checking myself out. Right now. Come get me. You can't, Marcus said. The doctor said you need at least another day of monitoring. Your blood sugar isn't stable. I don't care, Sarah said. Someone is using my children as weapons. Someone is hurting them to hurt you. I'm their mother, Marcus. I'm not staying in this bed while they're suffering. Come get me, or I'll walk out of here in a hospital gown. Marcus was already grabbing his keys. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Sarah discharged herself against medical advice, signing forms with shaking hands, while a disapproving doctor lectured her about the risks. She was pale, weak, but her jaw was set with a determination that reminded Marcus of Elena in her final days, that same refusal to give up, to surrender to circumstances beyond her control. They went first to the hospital security office, where Marcus still had access despite technically being off-duty. He pulled up the footage from 2 mornings ago, the parking lot cameras capturing everything in grainy but undeniable detail. There, Sarah said, pointing at the screen. Look at that timestamp, 6:04 a.m. The twins approached Marcus. He didn't approach them. They came to him. Marcus burned the footage to a disc, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Next, they drove to the ambulance bay, where Marcus knew the paramedics gathered between calls. Torres was there, the same paramedic who'd responded to Sarah's collapse. She remembered everything, agreed immediately to write a formal statement about how the twins had been desperate for help, how Marcus had been nothing but professional and compassionate. We need one more thing, Sarah said as they sat in Marcus's car in the hospital parking lot. The photograph, the one Elena gave me. That's our proof that this connection was real, that it wasn't some predatory stalking. It shows intent, Marcus. It shows your wife wanted us in your life. They returned to Sarah's hospital room, where her belongings were stored. She retrieved the photograph from her purse, Elena's handwriting on the back as clear and damning and beautiful as a signed confession. Love finds its way home. Finally, Marcus made the hardest call of all. He dialed the main number for Child Protective Services and asked for the supervisor of Donald Pritchard. A woman named Margaret Reese came on the line, her voice professional but wary. "This is Marcus Reed," he said. "I'm the subject of an investigation by Mr. Pritchard. I have evidence that his case against me was manufactured as an act of personal revenge. I'm requesting an immediate hearing, and if I don't get one, I'm taking everything I have to the media." There was a long pause. Then Reese said, "Come to my office at 2 o'clock this afternoon. Bring your evidence. And Mr. Reed," she added, her voice softening slightly, "I suggest you bring a lawyer." Marcus didn't have a lawyer. He had something better. He had the truth, documented and undeniable. He had Sarah, a mother willing to fight heaven and earth for her children. And he had Elena's promise, written in her own hand, proof that love could reach across death itself. At 2 o'clock, Marcus and Sarah walked into Margaret Reese's office. It was a small, cramped space filled with case files and the exhausted bureaucracy of an underfunded system. Reese was a black woman in her 50s, her hair streaked with gray, her eyes sharp and knowing. Pritchard sat in the corner, his expression smug, his arms crossed. "This is highly irregular," Pritchard said before anyone else could speak, meeting with the accused without proper protocol. "Quiet, Donald," Reese said, and her tone made it clear she was not in the mood for his commentary. "Mr. Reed, you have 30 minutes to present your case. Make it count." Marcus laid it all out, the security footage showing beyond doubt that the twins had approached him, not the other way around. The paramedic's statement confirming the emergency nature of the situation. Jennifer Hollis's original approval of temporary custody, complete with her home inspection notes, describing Marcus's home as safe, clean, and appropriate for children. And finally, the photograph, with Elena's message on the back. "This proves premeditation," Sarah added, her voice weak but unwavering. "Marcus's wife, my patient, created this connection before she died. She asked me to watch over her family. My daughters heard me talk about them and wanted to help. This wasn't kidnapping. This was a promise being kept." Pritchard laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "This is insane. You expect us to believe in ghost stories? In messages from beyond the grave? This is exactly the kind of delusional behavior that proves Mr. Reed is unstable." "Then explain the photographs," Marcus said, sliding printed copies of the threatening text messages across Reese's desk. "Explain how an anonymous tipster knew exactly where to be to photograph me at the exact moment the twins found me. Explain how that tipster knew to follow us to Sarah's apartment. Explain how they got photos from angles that suggest they were waiting, watching, setting up a trap." Reese studied the photos, her expression darkening. "These came with the anonymous report?" "Yes," Pritchard said, "from a concerned citizen who wished to remain unnamed. That's standard." "Is it standard," Marcus asked, his voice cold, "for that concerned citizen to be you?" The room went silent. Pritchard's smugness faltered, just for a second. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Reed, one you can't prove." "Actually," Marcus said, "I can." He pulled out his phone, showing the text messages from the unknown number. "I had a friend in the tech department at the hospital trace these. The number is a burner phone, purchased 3 days ago from a convenience store 4 blocks from your home, Mr. Pritchard. The store has security cameras. I'm betting if we check the footage, we'll see you buying it." Pritchard's face went white. "You have no right to investigate me. You're not law enforcement." "No," Marcus said, "but I am a security professional who's very good at finding things people want hidden, like your ex-wife's termination from Mercy Children's Hospital 3 years ago. Like the incident report I filed that led to her arrest. Like the divorce that followed 6 months later. This isn't about protecting children, Mr. Pritchard. This is about punishing me for doing my job 3 years ago." Reese stood up, her chair scraping loudly in the small office. "Donald, is this true? Did you initiate contact with this man as an anonymous tipster?" "I did my due diligence," Pritchard said, his voice rising defensively. "I investigated suspicious behavior. If my ex-wife's history with Mr. Reed came to light during that investigation, it's irrelevant to the facts of the case. It's entirely relevant, Reese said, her voice like iron. It's a conflict of interest. It's an abuse of your position. It's grounds for termination. She picked up her phone and made 2 calls. The first brought in 2 additional supervisors. The second requested the immediate return of Lily and Rose Mitchell to this office. This case is being reopened under my direct supervision, Reese announced. And Donald, you're suspended pending a full investigation into your conduct. Pritchard stood, his face red with fury. You're making a mistake. This man is dangerous. Those children aren't safe with him. Then let's ask them, Sarah said quietly. 30 minutes later, a CPS van pulled up outside the building. The twins emerged, their eyes red and puffy from crying, their hands clutched together. The moment they saw Marcus and Sarah through the window, they started screaming. "Mama!" they cried. "Mr. Reed, please, please don't make us go back." The hearing that followed was informal, but devastating. Reese brought the girls into a child-friendly interview room with Marcus, Sarah, and Emma present. Pritchard was not allowed inside. "Lily and Rose," Reese said gently, "I need you to tell me the truth. Did Mr. Reed take you from your home against your will?" "No," both girls said in unison. "We asked him for help. Mama was on the floor and we were scared and we found him because Mama talked about him. She said he was a good man who lost someone and we should help him." "Why did you want to help him?" Reese asked. "Because the lady told us to," Rose said simply, "in our dreams. The lady with the sad smile. She said her family needed us. She said we should find them." Emma, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "They told me about the dreams," she said, her voice small but clear. "They said a lady who looked like Mama, who was in our pictures, told them we were lonely, that we needed family. And they were right. We were lonely. We needed them." Reese looked at the photo of Elena, at her handwritten message, at the 3 little girls sitting together holding hands. Then she looked at Marcus and Sarah, 2 broken people who'd been brought together by an impossible promise. "Mr. Reed," Reese said finally, "I'm dismissing all charges against you. The twins will be returned to their mother's custody effective immediately, with you approved as an emergency contact and temporary guardian should the need arise." She turned to where Pritchard had been sitting earlier, but he was gone, escorted out by security. As for Mr. Pritchard, he'll be facing disciplinary action and possibly criminal charges for abuse of authority. The twins launched themselves at Marcus, wrapping their arms around his waist. Emma hugged Sarah, who started crying, her relief overwhelming. It was over. The nightmare was over. 2 weeks later, a tall man in military fatigues appeared on Marcus's doorstep. Sergeant James Mitchell had been given emergency leave and flown home the moment the Red Cross finally reached him with news of his wife's collapse. He stood on Marcus's porch, his duffel bag at his feet, his eyes exhausted but grateful. "You saved my family," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "My wife, my daughters. I don't know how to thank you." "They saved me too," Marcus said simply. "Your wife kept a promise to mine. Your daughters brought light back into our lives. We're all just trying to keep each other afloat." James stayed for 2 weeks, reconnecting with his daughters, helping Sarah adjust to her insulin regimen, learning about the strange and beautiful connection that had formed between their families. He didn't question the dreams or the promises or the impossible knowledge the twins seemed to have. He just watched his daughters laugh with Emma, watched his wife smile again, and accepted that some things couldn't be explained, only embraced. James's leave ended and he returned to finish his deployment. The 2 families continued to see each other. Playdates became dinners, became weekends, became a rhythm of shared life. Sarah and Marcus talked for hours about loss and grief and the terror of single parenting. They talked about Elena and about the strange gift she'd left them. And slowly, carefully, they began to talk about other things, movies they liked, books they'd read, dreams they'd set aside. 6 months after that terrible morning in the parking lot, Marcus took Sarah to dinner. A real dinner, just the 2 of them, while James, who'd returned home for good after completing his deployment, watched all 3 girls. It was their 5th date, and Marcus's hands shook as he reached across the table to take Sarah's. "I need to tell you something," he said. "I'm falling in love with you, and I feel guilty about it, like I'm betraying Elena." Sarah squeezed his hand. "Elena gave me a message for you," she said softly. That last night, when she made me promise to watch over you. She said something else. She said, "Don't be alone forever." She said, "Love isn't a betrayal. Love is the promise we keep." Marcus felt tears slide down his face. "Those were almost her exact words to me," he whispered. "The last thing she said before I left the hospital that night. I didn't understand what she meant. She meant this," Sarah said. "She meant us. She knew you'd need someone. She knew Emma would need a family. And somehow, impossibly, she made sure we found you." 8 months later, Marcus stood at Elena's grave with Emma by his side. They came every month bringing fresh flowers, talking to the woman who'd loved them so much she'd reached beyond death to care for them. Emma placed a bouquet of sunflowers, Elena's favorites, against the headstone. "Mama," Marcus said, his voice soft in the quiet cemetery, "I finally understand what you were trying to tell me. About love, about promises, about not being alone." He took a shaky breath. "Sarah and I are getting married next month. The girls will be there, all 3 of them. James is walking Sarah down the aisle. It's not a betrayal. Elena, it's not forgetting you. It's honoring what you wanted for us." Emma leaned against her father. "Mama kept her promise, didn't she, Daddy?" "Yeah, sweetheart," Marcus whispered. "She kept her promise." They stood in silence for a moment, the sun warm on their faces, the breeze carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass. Then Emma took her father's hand. "Come on, Daddy. Sarah and the twins are waiting for us. We're making cookies, remember?" Marcus smiled, letting his daughter pull him toward the car, toward the future Elena had somehow orchestrated. In the car, Sarah waited with Lily and Rose. The twins waved excitedly when they saw Marcus and Emma approaching. Sarah's smile was warm, open, full of a happiness Marcus had thought he'd never feel again. "Uncle Marcus," Lily called out the window, "hurry up. Rose says she's going to eat all the chocolate chips before we even start baking." "I did not," Rose protested, laughing. Marcus slid into the driver's seat, Sarah's hand finding his immediately. In the rearview mirror, he could see all 3 girls chattering and laughing, the twins flanking Emma like protective sisters. His family. A family built on grief and promise and the mysterious ways love refuses to die. As they drove away from the cemetery, Marcus glanced back one last time at Elena's grave. The sunlight caught the polished granite, making it glow. And for just a moment, he could have sworn he saw her there, standing by the headstone, her hand raised in a wave, her smile bright and knowing. Love finds its way home. She'd written those words 3 years ago, and now Marcus finally understood. Love wasn't something that ended with death. It transformed. It moved through people like Sarah and the twins. It created connections that defied logic. It kept promises across impossible distances. Elena had loved him enough to set him free. And in that freedom, he'd found not a betrayal, but a continuation, not an ending, but a new beginning. The story didn't end with grief. It had only been waiting for the next chapter to unfold. And now, driving through the afternoon sunlight with his expanded, impossible, beautiful family, Marcus Reed finally believed in happy endings again. Not because the pain was gone, but because love in all its stubborn, mysterious, transcendent glory had found its way home.